Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Majorly Undecided podcast. I would like to introduce myself as your host. My name is Clowes. I am an independent educational consultant who founded March Consulting, which helps students with college and career. We do a lot with college admissions and helping students find their paths. The reason that we started Majorly Undecided was to help students really find out what they wanted to be when they grew up, right? If you were anything like me, when I was in high school, I had no idea what I was going to do. And then I kept falling in love with things and then trying them out and discovering that they were not a good fit. And so we started this in the hopes of exposing students and parents to a whole bunch of different career fields and paths, and to assure you that if you're not sure what you want to do, if you're not sure what you want to major in, or out of high school if you feel a little bit lost, there are steps you can take to become unlost, to become decided, right? And so in our podcast, we are going to do interviews with various leaders who are from all walks of life that will introduce you to not only their path and what they did, but their industry and what makes a really good employee in that industry and what skills do you need to have and things of that nature. So I'm excited to bring to you those interviews. We'll also have episodes that center solely around tips and ways that you can go about getting to know yourself and what you are made to do. And so what I want to do first is actually tell you a little bit about my story. So our first interview is going to be with me. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. When I was in high school, I first started looking at careers and majors that would earn me a lot of money, that would guarantee me a job. And naturally, I gravitated toward science, technology, engineering, and math. I first thought I would be an orthodontist because all of my friends were getting braces at the time, and all the parents were complaining about how they were spending a fortune on braces. And so I thought that I might be an orthodontist because I could make a lot of money, I could have the big house and the car, and I could work with students all day long, which I really enjoyed. As I started looking a little bit more into it, I realized that I don't particularly like teeth or being in people's mouths, and being at an orthodontist office just didn't seem like the best fit for me, being in an office all day. So then I started exploring a little bit more my sophomore year of high school, and I landed on aerospace engineering because my dad was really into space exploration, and we watched videos on the Apollo missions, and we talked about being astronauts and things like that. And so I was gravitating more towards joining the Air Force and being a fighter pilot, right? Everything that I'd seen in the movies. And then going to Caltech and becoming an aerospace engineer and going into space and being an astronaut. It wasn't until my junior year that as I was vice president of the science club. We had arranged to take a tour of Edwards Air Force Base, which is here in California, with my biology teacher's brother who worked for the NASA station there. He gave us the behind the scenes tour, and I remember looking at one of these big hangars with all these airplanes in them, and he was talking about the math and aerodynamics and the physics behind everything. And my best friend, who was standing right behind me, couldn't get enough of it. He was all in. And then my other friend to the other side of me, she was all into it, asking questions and really excited about the prospect of the engineering behind everything. And I was mostly just bored and I wanted lunch. And so that was my first indication that I might not like this as much as I think I do. I enjoyed doing the flight simulator. We got to do a flight simulator, and I was the only one that didn't crash. But I also wasn't as excited about that as I thought it would be. And that experience, as I started looking a little bit more into the classes I would take and things like that, I realized that that wasn't a good fit for me either. It sounded exciting, and I thought that I liked it, but when I started experiencing it, I didn't like it at all. Naturally, I started looking again, and I went back to medicine, and I thought that I'd be a doctor, and when I gave blood, I nearly passed out. And the thought of blood, it just made me a little woozy and faint. And at the time, I was an athlete. I rode horses, and I did 3-day eventing. I was around horses every single day. And I had given shots, and I had watched the veterinarian do stitches, and I'd seen the gook and the abscesses and the gross part of veterinary science. And what I decided on is I could still go into medical, but I would go in medical for animals. So I was going to be a veterinarian. And I thought that this was the career for me. I already had experience in it. I was already interested in it. I had spent a whole bunch of time with horses, and I had spent time with veterinarians, and so I knew what I was getting into. When I went to college, I started with all my prerequisites looking toward vet school. So I planned everything out, what courses would I need to take, and that included courses like chemistry, organic chemistry, advanced math, physics, biology, microbiology. So I started all that coursework. And as I was going through it, I really wasn't as excited about it as I thought I was going to be, and I wasn't naturally gifted toward it. I liked the animal aspect of it. My classes were really challenging, which they should be going into medical. What really was the clue, however, is that I kept trying to sneak in as many humanities classes into my schedule as I could get. I love history. I really love history. It is story time to me. And so I would try to sneak in as many history classes into my schedule as I could between my science and math classes. I loved English literature and philosophy, so I would sneak those classes into my schedule. And meanwhile, I was still planning toward vet school. One of the requirements was that I get job shadowing hours, that I have clinical hours built into undergrad. So I started interning with a veterinarian the summer of my sophomore year. As a full intern, I did ride-alongs for Large Animal Vet. And during the practical part of that, when I realized that I'd be working on more than horses, I realized that veterinary science was not a fit for me either. And mainly because I'm not a big fan of cows. I love their function and what they do, so don't be offended if you love cows. But I like horses, and that's it, and cats. And the practical day-to-day of being a veterinarian just wasn't a good fit for me either. Now I'm in the middle of college, and I'm panicking because I'm going to be a junior. You have to declare, for most schools, especially the school I was going to, you have to declare a major. You have to be locked in by the time you're a junior. Or I was going to spend an additional year or two in college, which I could not afford. So I scrambled that summer. It was 3 weeks before school started. I had all my advanced STEM classes planned. I was registered and ready to go. And I sat down with my parents, and I just explained to them I hated every minute of being out doing calls with this veterinarian. And it wasn't anything to do with the veterinarian. It was just the job itself. I didn't like it. And I was lost. And I told them, I'm lost. I have no idea what to do. So my dad, we both started Googling, right? And he loved English literature. He was an English professor. He's an engineer now, but that's completely different. And so we started looking at what I was interested in and what I was really gifted in. And he had me write down on a piece of paper everything I might want to do for a living. And I wrote down school principal, teacher, journalist, novelist, newscaster. I was really reaching for straws at things I was interested in. I had a lot of theater as an extracurricular, and so I liked presenting. So he had me write down every single career that I might want to do. And then we, no joke, Googled the major that fit all of those things. It was an extensive path through Google. I do not recommend this is the way that you actually pick your major, but the common thread was communications. And that's how I picked my major. Bam, communications major. I got all the paperwork done at my college. I started all of my base foundation level communications classes that fall quarter. And I raced for the next 2 years to finish my degree in communications. While I was doing that, because I was still very interested in education, I enrolled in the Master's of Education program at my college to finish my Master's in Education and get my teaching credential. So I started that concurrent with my senior year of college, thinking that I'm going to be a credentialed teacher. I'll teach for 5 years and then I'll go into administration, because my high school principal had made a huge impact on me and I wanted to be her. So I was aspiring to be her. Well, when I started student teaching, which is basically you're on the job in a classroom with a current teacher, I started student teaching to gain those hours of experience. Again, the same roadblock. I didn't like it. The day-to-day, they had us in middle school. That might have had something to do with it. Going back to teaching, thinking about teaching now, I think it'd be in a completely different space. But at the time, it was torture that entire semester showing up for my student teaching. And I panicked again. And about that time, we were getting ready to graduate. And so my roommate and I, we were both communications majors. I had loved in all of my classes working with cameras and doing video editing. And I was a teaching assistant for a lot of the production classes at my school because I really liked the hands-on aspect of it, and I liked helping students and teaching what I knew, which is why I thought that I would be a teacher, right? But what I thought was maybe I can take all this that we're learning, and all of our professors were really good about telling us more what we're going to need, the tools we're going to need to go into the industry. They would share stories on set, documentary crews, working for a news station, a lot of really practical information for getting a job in the industry. I loved working with the camera and being behind the camera and working with camera angles and focus and the more technical side of camera work. So when I sat down with my roommate, her and I concocted this plan to move to Hollywood, right? It's like a bad teen movie, I know. We were going to move to Hollywood. I was going to be a director of photography, a cinematographer for Spielberg, right? Just right out of the gate, I thought this was going to happen, which is insane. And then she wanted to be a video editor for Warner Brothers. We had some connections in LA from former classmates that had graduated the year before, contacted them, moved to LA without jobs, barely an apartment, no leads really. We started talking to our past alumni, and there used to be a very special list in Hollywood that had all the jobs posted on it. And the thing about LA is networking is huge. You have to know somebody. And so we started doing that networking, and we got that list, and we started just applying for jobs blindly, because at that point we're 3 weeks in and we'd have no jobs and rent's coming due, right? So we got desperate. And I learned very quickly I'm not going to be able to just walk on a set and be a camera person. Like, that was just not going to happen. And so I started blindly applying for anything I could get my hands on. And I ended up as a production assistant on a project. It was a very small budget project, but it got me experience on set, and I was very glad to do it. But what I learned during that time was that too was not a good fit for me. So in that experimentation, I learned that I don't like being outside in the cold at 3 a.m. trying to get a shot. I don't have a what's called thick skin, meaning that when people are upset with me or yell at me, I don't do very well with that. And so in LA, that's really important, is you really have to have a thick skin and let things roll off of you and just move on with the work. That was really hard for me. And I didn't like making movies as much as I thought I did. You can kind of see a string here, right? You try it out and no. Oh, you try it out, no. And I got so frustrated because I thought something was wrong with me. Everyone else around me knew exactly what they were doing, and they had a passion for it, and they'd been doing it since they were 5 years old, and they were living the dream. And here I can't even just decide on something, right? Looking around more for another job when that project ended, I landed a job as a receptionist at a talent agency. And I got to learn more about the business side of entertainment. And the talent agency that I worked for was amazing. Everyone in there was very professional, very nice. Later, I'll tell you some stories about my interview process if we do a interview podcast episode. But I learned a lot from being a receptionist there at the talent agency, and then eventually I worked my way up to being a agent's assistant and learned a lot about contracts and casting and how that whole process works. The whole time, though, I still felt like I was an imposter in my job. I didn't feel like I was particularly gifted toward it. I wasn't very good at it. And while I was interested, it wasn't my life. I had I had an amazing mentor who took me aside at one point, and she said, if your dream isn't to become an agent, you're on that path right now. You might want to look around before you become an agent, and then you get into your 30s and you start getting a mortgage and married and things like that before you get stuck, because that's what happened to me. Is I got stuck in this, and while I'm good at it now, I wish I would have taken the opportunity to further explore. And I was about 22, 23 at this point, and I really took that to heart. And so I left my job there. I put in my 2 weeks, and I started looking at other opportunities. And in that time, I was a producer's assistant, I was a production coordinator assistant, and became a production coordinator, and then looked a little bit more into location scouting. And I was just lost. I had no idea what to do next, and there wasn't anybody really guide me, and my parents were trying their best. So finally, I landed a couple small projects helping with costume design. I know how to sew pretty well. My grandma taught me how to sew, and I have a great interest in history, as I told you. And so I started working on historical theatrical productions, and I loved that. And finally, I felt like there was something that when I got home, I just couldn't digest enough information. I would watch YouTube videos, and I would read books, and I would look at portraits and try to figure out how they I would try to figure out how they put together a garment. I would experiment with my sewing machine. I would really try to recreate what I saw. And there was a position open at a college for a costume designer, and I applied for it, and I got the position. So for the first time in all those years of searching, I felt like I had found my calling. After a couple years, I discovered that what I really loved was working with students. And the 2008 recession happened, and the schools all got defunded, and I got laid off, essentially. The dean called me in and said, we're not going to have funding for your job next year, so you might want to start looking. I chose something safe. Costume design and project management are very similar. As you're in costume design, you are managing a budget and a design and a process, and it has a deadline, and you have all these stakeholders. So I looked into safer industries, and I landed a job at Pacific Gas and Electric. It's an electric company. I explored more there, but what I discovered is the safe corporate job didn't fit me either. I weathered through the recession, and I learned all that I could there, but I started looking again. And in looking again, that's how I became an independent educational consultant. Is that whole time I kept helping students. I would do small costume design projects on the side, and mostly I would run into teenagers or transfer students, high school students or transfer students who were going through the admissions process, and I knew that process really well from my own experiences. And a friend of mine happened to walk by one day, and he said, oh, that sounds like my educational consultant. She helped me with college applications. And I was so intrigued by that idea that I just went into the research binge again. And I talked to other consultants and I enrolled in a program, and I couldn't get enough of it. 10 years later, here we are. I've learned so much about admissions and the process and learning from my students and them learning from me. But what I love the most is giving them that assurance that they're not alone. And I think that throughout my whole journey, that's what I felt the most, is that something was wrong with me and that I was alone. But now, helping students, I realize how common this feeling is, that you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what you're passionate about. And there's really no guidance out there for that. That's my goal with Majorly Undecided, with this podcast and our website, is providing as many resources to you as possible so that you don't feel how I felt and you don't waste the time and the money that I did finding what really fits you and really just lights you up as a person. Because a lot of adults talk about find your passion and you never work a day in your life and things of that nature. But that's not actual advice that you can take action for, right? That's something we say and it sounds nice, but how do you take action on that? And that's what I'm really hoping to share with you, is how do you take that action? How do you avoid the mistakes that I made? I'll mention my little brother on future episodes, but my little brother, he's 5 years younger than me. He'll always be my little brother. He'll always be like the 3-year-old in my mind, right? That has cake all over his face. But my brother got the benefits of learning from my path. I'm the oldest. And I tried my best as a big sister to put him on a really great path to discovering what he wanted. And like every student, he got a little doubtful in the middle and recentered his goals, and he's doing amazing things now. All of my students that I work with, it's a matter of releasing the preconceived notions that we have about all these 10 careers that you hear about in high school, right? And taking the time to get to know yourself and experimenting and learning. Very long story short, I've gone through this process. I've worked students through this process, and I really just hope that I can share with you ways that you can avoid that loss of confidence, loss of time and money in finding out what really lights you up as a person and how you can share your skill set and gifts with the world. Future episodes, we will be interviewing people in different careers, and that we're going to focus more on the skill sets and the talents needed in those careers to be successful. We'll talk with different professors in college departments about the opportunities available with a major that you might not have considered before. And I'm going to give you some great action-oriented tips for how you go about this process and taking action on what's going on. Not just sharing with you to live your passion, but actually, how do you discover what that is? And if I can break apart this complex process into bite-sized pieces for you to try and experiment with, then I've succeeded. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I look forward to you listening to future episodes. Please subscribe, and you'll be notified each week when there's a new episode that arrives. We will also have show notes where we'll have resources for you. Don't be afraid to reach out to us, ask a question. We might center an entire episode around your question. And visit our website, majorlyundecided.com. You'll find some great resources there, including a free guide. It's a quick guide to taking action to decide your major right now. You click there. You'll also have access to our updates and newsletters. I promise I will not spam you. I will not sell your information, anything like that. But I want to share with you as much as I can, as much as possible, so that you don't have a similar journey to mine and you feel confident in your choices and you know that you're taking action every day to discover what's going to be best for you. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you later.